one guy, and he lives somewhere near New Orleans, and he had sort of thought about the same thing and looked into this. But otherwise, there's a complete lack of people noticing what a vulnerable system this is. The UK is particularly badly affected because, as it says there, 99% of our food imports depend on these ports, and actually, mostly they depend on 3 ports in the southeast of England, one of which is Tilbury, where my cargo ship came in. And of course, you know, the country's doing that, and the southeast is particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. It's only doing that very slowly, so you don't have to sort of worry about falling over or anything. Okay, so this is 2 graphics now from Herbie Girardet, who's actually a member of the Schumacher Institute here in Bristol. And he's done some interesting work. It's just really thinking how our systems of provisioning work, and thinking how we might try to change those to make them more resilient. So this is what he says we live with now, which he calls Petropolis. You can see it's a system that's heavily dependent on oil. It's the kind of system that Steve was talking about, with food travelling vast distances, coming into, in fact, you know, there's my cargo ship, bringing food into the city from the other side of the world, and people also travelling huge distances and all that motorway transport and so on. And what he thinks we should replace that with is this lovely vision of ecopolis, where, and I think this is the kind of thing Bristol's moving towards, and also in a way London Food are moving towards this kind of vision. But again, we'll hear more about this from Joy. But the kind of idea is that you have your urban centre, and then as you move outwards, you move into the area of food growing, and then beyond that, the area of energy generation, and then some grazing land and woodland. And you kind of provision for your needs in the city or in the market town from around your area, so from your natural hinterland, rather than focusing on this global trade system, which is basically designed to achieve maximum profits for a small number of companies, not to achieve the social or ecological ideal for the citizens of the world. Okay, this is the bit where I have a go at capitalism now. Because basically the whole of the argument around supermarkets assumes that we're living in a market system. That's a kind of given when we talk about economics. But it's a view of the world that I think we should challenge. You notice that I've been using this word provisioning, and I use that because I don't want to think that we always meet our needs in terms of buying and selling, in terms of selling our labour and then buying things in the market. Because I'm sure there are a lot of people in the room that actually don't get all their food in that way, to have an allotment or buy something from a local producer or exchange something in a non-monetary way. And that's the kind of economy that I think we should also be encouraging. So we're not just arguing about whether we should go to supermarkets or go to local shops. We're also thinking about ways of meeting our own needs directly. Karl Polanyi is my favourite economist. He basically had this very land-based view of the world, and he had a view of economics that grew out of his studies in anthropology. So he travelled the world to see how people actually ran their economies. And what he found is there was a lot of exchanging, a lot of swapping, a lot of self-provisioning going on, and the market system was actually something of an aberration, and a fairly recent one. Unfortunately invented in this country, so we're sort of responsible for sorting out the problem. But he refers to market economy as a utopian myth, and a lot of the theory that supports it, not just bits of bogus theory like the idea of overtrading, but the whole idea of supply and demand and equilibrium and so on, he thought was a sort of artificial myth to encourage sort of profiteering and the sort of power-based systems of a capitalist economy, which I would argue have got worse in the era of globalisation. So here's a kind of example of the alternative economic system which I might propose. This is the lovely Dave Casper, who runs Dave's Cottage Orchard near Stroud, and apparently knows 247 different varieties of apple, and there he is selling his lovely apple juice. So I use this kind of concept of borrowing your resources from the local natural environment. So rather than taking something from nature, turning it into something else using a huge amount of energy, and then throwing it away, you see it as much more of a cyclical process. And I think this is what I call the bioregional economy, which is also the name of my latest book, should you be interested. And I think it really gives you a much better connection to your local land, because what you eat is much more likely to come from there. And also you can then take responsibility for your local place, and also have some sort of accountability. So I think local food provisioning is so much more than just the farmer's market and thinking, oh, I prefer that to the supermarket. There's a really deep cultural connection that goes on, and of course also much greater security if your food is coming from your local area. Eric Pickles. So now we're getting to the sort of more practical proposals, because when we started thinking about this in Stroud, we immediately thought that the real thing that gives the supermarkets an unfair market advantage is the fact that they don't charge for parking. Of course, because they're out of town, they also pay lower business rates, and that's why they're there. But they also have this huge advantage that you can park there for free. So Pickles is now saying that the problem is town centres are dying because we as councils charge too much for people to park there. So we're supposed to now let them park in the town for free as well. But obviously, as the Green Party, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think we should be encouraging more driving. But to level out this playing field, how about we charge supermarkets? We charge people to park at supermarkets. Now, you might immediately say, oh, well, the supermarkets would just pass that on to the customers. But actually, I think the chances are that, they'd give you a ticket, and when you went in, you could actually get a refund if you shopped with them. But it would now start to mean that you actually had a sense of paying at the supermarket, and it would disadvantage them. And if all it meant was that the money came to the council for that parking, then that would give us money to invest in the high street, in the local shops. Oh, no, what was else on that previous slide? I'm sure I've got something else to say about that one. Oh, yes. Actually, Lewis and Exeter tried to do this in 2009, before we had this Conservative government, and Labour were pretty supportive, actually, of the attempt to charge for parking at supermarkets. But the Tories, the motorists' friend, labelled this as another stealth tax, and they crushed it in law. And this is why Steve and I will have to have a bit of a chat about what might be possible legally, because I'm not sure how much it's worth starting a fight that ends up being a fight with Eric Pickles, because I'm not sure how far we'll get. But anyway, I'm willing to give it a go, so we'll have a chat about that. Okay, so yeah, two more things. Just going back to my point about meeting our own needs. Another way of doing that is through this kind of community farm system. I know there's a similar, at least one of these community farms in Bristol, but this is the one we have in Stroud Community Agriculture. We like to think it's the first and an inspiring example. So, okay, fine, you can have your allotment, but I actually travel quite a lot for my work, and I don't really have time to be effective at running an allotment. But I see this as a kind of, it's better than an allotment, because it's like an allotment I can go to, I get the food, but I don't have to do the work. So it's actually rather good. And it does reconnect the supply and demand, and it kind of gets you away from that supply and demand in conflict, which is the basic economic model that I think is at the heart of the problem we've got ourselves into. And just one thing we're doing in this area from Transition Stroud, which is our annual Potato Day. Do you have Potato Day in Bristol?
No, not yet.
Right, got to do that next year. We were trying to think, well, what is it that, because we had this real thing, we're so middle class, what are we going to do about that? So we tried to think of something that works across all classes and everybody likes it, and we thought of three things: football, beer and potatoes. And so we decided to go for potatoes, and so we put our potato stall right there in the middle of the shopping centre, and some people thought it was rather weird, but lots of people came up and said, oh, well, we're going to try that this year, we'll have some of your potatoes and we'll try to grow them. And it's now a regular feature, and I think it is engaging people in this idea of growing stuff locally, using your local soil. Lots of people have, tried it. They'd done it when they were kids, and they hadn't done it for 30 years, and now they were trying again. So, and it was a very good community day as well. I think that's all apart from my advertising. Yeah, just to say, my Green Economics book tells you kind of some of the theory I was talking about supply and demand, and the second book there is much more earthy, and is about the stuff I was talking about with how we might reconnect with the soil through our decision about how we buy things. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.